with the family, etc., etc. As time went on, we found that it wasn't such fun. A lot of us stay in very small flats. So to have two people working online quietly, to have maybe one or two kids who are trying to do studying online, to have an older member in the family who's used to having his or her own privacy and maybe having his or her own attendant who comes in and looks after him during the day. When all of that gets affected, it might be amusing for a few days, but then over a period of time, it gets very, very irritating and gets very, very frustrating. It also gets even more frustrating when we have no idea as to when this pandemic is going to cease. If somebody told me that in about a month, 2 months, 6 months, everything would come back to the way it was before, then I'd be in a situation where I'd push myself. I'd survive these 4, 5, 6 months. I'd do whatever I had to do in order to get to wherever the end of the pandemic. And then you go back and say, oh, those were the days. Today, we don't know when the pandemic is going to start. We have the first wave, we've got the second wave, people are now talking of the third wave, people are talking of the fact that it's going to continue for a year, 2 years, 3 years. Schools have been disrupted, colleges don't function, airlines have ceased, India currently is in a very bad shape. All of these are known to affect everybody. And one might just imagine that if they affect adults who have good cognition, who have fairly good ego structures, then when we are looking at kids, it's going to be even more traumatic. So when we're looking at kids, and I was just doing a little bit of research, I was a little starting to know that the world has actually 2.2 billion kids. That's a lot of kids. When we talk of kids, we're talking about up to the age of 18. We're talking of they being about 28% of the population. And India has the largest child population in the world, just like it's getting to having the largest, or it might already have now, the largest old population in the world. So we've got both extremes. Research has also found that the age group between 10 to 19% of 19 years is actually 16% of this huge population. So when we are looking at trauma and when we are looking at how adults are affected, how industries are affected, we actually have to pay an enormous amount of attention to how kids are affected and what consequences this pandemic is going to have for them in the future, because they are our future. What would the long-term effects depend on? They depend on the actual vulnerability of the system. They depend on the genetics that are already present in every child. I mean, we all know that the same event can cause different consequences in different people, and dependent on your genetic makeup, you're going to either react stoically, or you're going to find it amusing, or you're going to get very irritated, or you might even have a psychotic breakdown. So if you're looking at all of these, this is one of the things that we look at. This is one of the things that we need to pay tremendous attention to. At one time, it was only he hasn't been breastfed enough. There are too many environmental factors, etc., etc. He comes from a cold mother and a very distant father. Today, we are looking more in terms of structures of the brain. We are looking more in terms of genetics. And we do know that all of that is going to play a very, very, very important role in the near future. We are also looking at the developmental age of the child. I mean, everybody knows the stages of development in terms of the physical aspects, but we also have mental aspects to it. We have cognitive aspects. We have educational things that we expect kids to do. We have behavioral issues that we expect kids to go through. And to some extent, when you're in an unnatural series of events, when you're in an unnatural environment, everything gets affected. So it's not then going to be surprising if we find kids in the future having major problems, maybe with socialization, having problems with being able to pay attention, and things like that. A lot of us forget about special need kids. We must remember anyway that mental illnesses affect about 20 to 25% of the population. So that is 1 out of 4 people is going to have some kind of a problem. That includes kids. So we are looking at hyperactivity, we are looking at the autism spectrum, we are looking at kids who are now being diagnosed at younger and younger age groups with depression and anxiety. Anxiety is probably the commonest thing that all of us are now seeing because the kids are in such a stilted environment. They don't know what the future is going to be in terms of education. The 10th standard exams have been cancelled, the 12s have been postponed. They don't know what the future is going to be like. It becomes quite a trauma. We're looking at pre-existing mental conditions. So like I said, all of these things, if the kids already had, very often their symptoms get aggravated. And if they didn't have it, then a lot of kids who are in an almost okay state of equilibrium, in an almost okay state of stability, because of all these extra pressures coming in, and because they're looking around them and they're finding the important adults in their lives also getting very badly affected, they're going to land up having consequences to that. Whether we like it or not, economically privileged kids do have a slight advantage. Their parents have the wherewithal to do a lot of things. Unfortunately, in today's generation, just about everything does work through privilege as well. So we're going to have an increase in the divide. And that divide now is not only economic, it also becomes digital. Given the fact that just about everybody now is doing online schooling or online college work, it goes without saying that if you don't have the access to being connected digitally, then you're going to be having some kind of a backward, you're going to be in a backward situation in comparison to the rest of the kids. And then we have a huge amount of parents who get affected, who have got the COVID. Every day I'm hearing heart-wrenching stories of somebody who's losing a mother, somebody who's losing a father, kids who are losing both parents. We cannot even imagine the trauma they're going through. I have my colleagues calling me and talking to me about the horrible situations that they sometimes are faced with in hospitals, where one of my friends was called in to see somebody in the ICU. He had lost his mother, he lost his father, he lost his sister. He was the only existing guy left in the family. And he was attempting to kill himself. Now, what do we do as professionals? What am I going to tell him? It's okay, you will get over it. He probably won't. It will always remain as some of the things. And you get into this thing of the good Lord wants to call people who he cares about more. All of that is nonsense. This kind of thing should not have happened. We get into various side effects or various things that we see with younger kids. If you're looking at the 3 to 6 year old, my colleagues and I and the research papers have shown that there's an incredible increase in what we call clingy behavior. So the kids want to cling more. They get very scared when mom and dad are not around. They get very scared even more if they're watching these horrible visuals on television. And I keep telling everybody that yes, you cannot be ignorant. We must know what's happening in our cities. We must know what's happening in the world. But sometimes we get into this obsessive thing and we are watching the news 6 hours, 8 hours, 10 hours a day. And the visuals are horrendous. Visuals, of course, point out to what is happening in our society. But especially if you have kids at home, it would be a good idea for you not to get stuck on what you're watching on the television, where you're watching people screaming, you're watching the stuff related to oxygen, you're watching people dying. I mean, it's a very bad state of affairs. And when our kids are watching this over and over and over again, it is going to affect them. A lot of kids, especially in that age group, also keep talking of getting infected. And we used to talk about obsessive compulsive disorders, especially associated with, contamination and hygiene, and you have to hand wash and stuff like that. We used to see that happening when I was a medical student. We would say it started about 16, 17, 18. Now we say it starts at about 8 and it starts at about 12. And today we are having youngsters, 6 and 8 year olds, who are going obsessively into the bathroom, spending 8 hours, 9 hours just hand washing and saying, "Mommy, will the germs attack me?" What was amusing at one time, I remember when the pandemic had started, one of my friends in America had sent me his kid's video. And we'd all been told hand wash for about 30 seconds at the time, and the little kids didn't understand what 30 seconds was. What did they start doing? They said, happy birthday to me twice. And apparently, if you sing happy birthday to me twice, and I checked this out, in the normal speed, it takes about 30 seconds. 2 hours after, 2 months after that, or 3 months after that, he sent me an SOS call saying, Kersi, please tell me what I'm supposed to do. My kids are spending 4 and 5 and 6 hours in the bathroom, and I'm freaking out. I really don't know how to get them to stop. We're seeing an increase in that kind of behavior. There's an enormous amount of anxiety. Now, anxiety and depression, anyway, are, I mean, it's very rare that you find them in absolute little silos. One merges into the other. They are the two commonest psychological disorders. In kids, anxiety we looked at when they were very young, when they went to school, they had a problem in separating from their parents, and we would talk of separation anxiety. Today we're seeing an enormous amount of separation anxiety, and it's not related to parents leaving them to go to the office. It's not related to they going to work, to school. It is just related to the fact that they need people around them all the time. They find it difficult to sleep at night without kids. They find it difficult to cope if they don't have children around them. If they don't have parents around them, it becomes a very, very major issue. For the older child, what we are seeing, and once again, what research is proving, is a lot of inattention. Now, we all know that everything is becoming online, studies are online, classes are online, extra tuitions are online, you're meeting people online. Not surprisingly, then you're spending a lot of time online. At one time it became, would this affect the eyes? And now we know it doesn't. They've done studies and they found that provided you have a good light source, which is normally behind your laptop, provided you're not watching it in the dark, and provided it at, say, every half an hour interval, you kind of look out into the distance and blink your eyes to enable proper tears to form, you don't normally land up having a problem with your eyes. But we do know that kids are getting more and more stuck on the laptop. And over a period of time, especially for the older child, it stands to reason he's going to get onto some site which you don't want him to. He's going to land up doing things, either playing games over and over again and stuff like that. And while maybe the phenomenon of addiction is a little over-exaggerated, we still have to be a little careful about this. We also have to realize that if everybody is only online, it's becoming like what we do at birthdays. I just type in happy birthday to you rather than take the trouble to actually call you and wish you. And if our kids land up doing that over and over and over again, it's going to be not very nice in terms of the society that we live in. Most kids today land up having sleep issues. Most of them. Most adults nowadays land up having sleep issues. That's probably the commonest symptom because of which people call me and talk to me. That's probably the commonest symptom because of which people are feeling tired all the time. And maybe we get into this thing of, in the morning, I don't have to really get up early enough. I don't really have to go to school. And nowadays there's holidays, school is on a hold. Even when school was there, at one time I needed to get up at 6 in order to get the school bus to reach the school, and school would start at 8:30. Today it's at home, I can get up at 8. Because of that, I'm going to sleep later and later. So I sleep at 11 and I sleep at 12 and I sleep at 1. And very often we're doing Netflix and we're doing Amazon Prime and things like that. The hassle is, even though people say that, I'll sleep a couple of hours in the afternoon and I'll kind of compensate for the lack of sleep that I've had. The hassle is that there's a lot of stuff that happens because of the melatonin in our brain. Melatonin is released by the pineal gland in our brain. And because of that, because melatonin replenishment is extremely important. In fact, we are now looking at it as almost like a wonder drug. We are getting into situations where melatonin is not happening, proper rejuvenation does not take place, a whole bunch of other effects that melatonin has also does not occur, and it does not get compensated for if you sleep in the afternoon. So you need your 7 or 8 hours of sleep at night, and you must work towards that. The hassle also is, if we are constantly talking to our friends, and I mean, we've all been, I worked in a whole bunch of schools, and I know that especially in the 8th, 9th, 10th, kids would, have the cell with them, and then they keep talking to their friends, their boyfriends and their girlfriends and the other friends till late at night. So when mom and dad felt that you were asleep, you'd still be running around with that little thing in your hand and messaging. And you go to sleep at 1 and 2 in the morning and you go groggy to school at night. Unfortunately, that doesn't really happen now. You're still all the time stuck on the cell, and that becomes a problem. We are finding an enormous amount of lethargy. We are finding an enormous amount of sleep issues. Associated with that, and probably related to the stuff that they're watching on television, the incidence of nightmares seems to have increased in kids. It also seems to have increased in adults, but there's a distinct thing that we have seen in terms of kids. We have kids who are screaming in their sleep. We have kids who are talking much more than before in their sleep. And parents are often telling me that, my kid used to sleep separately, and now suddenly in the middle of the night, 3 or 4 times in a week, he'd come up to me and he'd say, Mom, can I please sleep with you and Dad? It portends towards the fact that there is a lot of anxiety, and that causes an issue. Schools and colleges have been closed. That effectively impacts negatively on about 90% or 95% of the world school population. One side, of course, there is a slight amount of disruption in education because all said and done, you probably would study better if you were in a place where you could face the person, especially in a younger age group. It's very difficult to pay attention all the time when you're just looking at a screen. I mean, I know that we are now permitted because of the pandemic to do video calls and to present prescriptions online virtually. If I deal with 10 patients on a screen, it exhausts me. If I deal with 15 patients on a one-to-one, it doesn't cause me such a hardship. So we find that happening all the time. We find it happening in terms of the work that people are doing. We find it happening in terms of the studying that people are doing. Not surprisingly, kids are having more and more issues related to actually concentrating on it. And let's face it, if mommy and daddy are not constantly supervising what the kid is doing, the kid is going to play up a bit. He look like he's studying, but he's not. He look like he's paying attention to the classes, but very often he doesn't. All of these issues we do see. There is also an extremely important aspect for kids where we socialize with each other. And that socialization on a one-to-one basis or a one-to-many basis has really stopped. Kids hug each other, push each other, fight with each other, scream at each other, abuse each other, act silly in a classroom, bang the desk, do all of those things. All of that has stopped. When I think of my past, when I was in school, even though I was a very good student, I don't really remember the studies. I remember the jokes we had. I remember the noise we made in class. I know in medical college, I was in a college where the anatomy hall was this huge cavernous structure, and it was like an arena. So you had steps coming down. And when we'd get bored, I mean, we're talking about medical students, so please don't quote me on this. But when we'd get bored, the guy right on top would drop a marble, and it would go tuck, 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 tuck all the way down. Those are the things we remember. I don't remember studying and exams. I remember the fun we had, and our kids now are not having fun. We have to face up to the fact they are just not having fun. So when they don't have fun, what do? They do something called acting out. What is the meaning of acting out? You can either get aggressive, you can get angry, you can get obstinate, you can get oppositional, and sometimes you get depressed, you get withdrawn, you keep quiet, and you say, oh, woe is me. Especially for the kids of the higher classes, the 9th and the 10th, the 11th and the 12th, the kids who have just passed, who have done their graduation. I mean, I have a neighbor whose daughter is a brilliant kid and was wanting to go abroad for a master's, had got admission into a very prestigious university abroad, had got scholarships for the same because it's extremely expensive, and then the lockdown occurred. Neighbor said, no way are you going, I'm not letting you go. Fortunately, the university has kind of allowed for a transfer to the next year for the scholarships and all because she's a brilliant kid. And now lockdown 2 has occurred, and we become the new untouchables, and none of our flights are allowed into Europe and stuff like that. We don't know what is going to happen. We have a whole bunch of people like that. We have a whole bunch of kids who don't know what they're going to do after the 10th, who don't know how they're going to go into the 11th. because structures have not yet been laid down. We don't know what's going to happen for the 12th. Exams right now have been postponed. Are they going to be postponed indefinitely? Are you still going to be allowing them to go into college without appearing for the exams? All of these things are going to affect the way our kids look at life in the future. And let's face it, for the kid who was really slogging and slogging and slogging, and then he suddenly finds there's no exams, versus a kid who was not slogging and he finds there are no exams, obviously reactions are going to be different. Obviously, one person will feel a little more than the other, and that can have eventual repercussions as they grow up. One of the things that we have been finding also in terms of reactions in people in general is an increase in aggression. When adults get frustrated, let's face it, there are a lot of jobs which have been lost. There have been a lot of economic problems that we have been facing. Adults get frustrated. When adults get frustrated, there is tension, there is stress. So if you're looking at it in terms of how the person is going to react, a lot of people will react by getting angry and aggressive towards the most vulnerable person in the family. We're seeing an increase in spousal abuse. Husband hits wife, wife hits husband. We're seeing a lot of child abuse because the child is usually the most vulnerable. And especially in the economically underprivileged, where anyway there is so much of stress, where maybe there may not be so much of protection, where maybe there may not be so much of awareness of what is happening. Even though I'm not racist and I'm not saying that things like this don't happen in the economically very well-to-do person, we're still seeing that there is an enormous amount of child abuse that is happening. I was a little aghast to hear that since the pandemic, our child line 1098 has had a 50% increase in the number of calls from kids who have problems. 1098, any kid can just go to a public forum and call them and then they get help. So Childline in this has just come out with a statement saying in the last year since the pandemic, they've come out with a 50% increase. Obviously, our kids are getting very badly affected. And somehow in our own little privileged areas, we kind of look at kids as only urban, going to good schools, going to good colleges, going abroad. We forget there's a huge amount of kids who are not so privileged. About 2 weeks ago, I was a panelist in a webinar again organized by the youth wing of the Shiv Sena, and they organized it for the BMC schools, the 10th and 12th standard kids. We had something like 5,000 people who logged on. I was a psychiatrist, there was a psychologist, there was an educationist. And the questions asked were heart-rending. What am I going to do in the future? How am I going to cope? Why is it happening to me? Now this why is it happening to me? There is no answer. The only thing that actually keeps us going is that at least you're not singled out. At least it's not only happening to your family, it's happening to billions of people across the world. Now that doesn't make it better for me, but it makes me feel a little better. I mean, if I was the only one who was facing up to this, I'd probably be much more traumatized than what I am today. Let's look at the fact also that when you have adults who have mental health problems, just like you have kids who have mental health problems, if you have adults who have mental health problems, it is imperative that they should be looked after. And a lot of them have already taken medication. A lot of them probably are already seeing a doctor. But because of lockdowns and distribution chains being affected for drugs in chemist shops, you might not have access to the medication as much as before and things like that. It is essential to ensure that you continue with the whole thing. It is essential to ensure that this does not stop. And very often, given the fact that there has been so much of trauma, so much of environmental stress, you're going to get more affected. It is even more essential that you keep in touch with your doctor or your therapist or whoever else you're seeing, and you do whatever you can in order to make things better. If there is an upgrade needed in medication, if there is an increase in the frequency needed in your therapy, please go ahead and do it, and don't get into this thing of what will people say, people don't matter, you matter. It's even more important because if you have kids at home and if you are not, in a sense, behaving appropriately, the kid is going to get very badly affected. So then we have an increase in the kind of problems that we face across families, and that becomes a major issue. I'm going to spend 2 minutes or 3 minutes speaking about a huge category of kids we have, which is special kids. Because I see that some of my friends are smiling at me on the as they're listening to me, and excellent people who are dealing with special needs kids. Special needs kids is a huge set of people who we need to deal with. They cannot be allowed to slip through the cracks of our education system. I was privileged enough, like somebody mentioned, to be part of the first team dealing with learning disabilities. That was in 1988, I think. We laid down a few guidelines, and after that, the parents took over, other organizations took over, and now learning disabilities and the kids associated with them are given the privileges that they rightfully deserve. We have kids who can't speak properly, we have kids who can't hear properly, we have kids of the autism spectrum disorder, we have kids with spasticity, we have kids with neurodegenerative problems, we have youngsters with cancers who land up having problems, we have youngsters with other issues, depression, anxiety, OCDs, psychosis. The incidence of kids coming to us has increased. Now, that might also be because there is more awareness. That might be because there's more reporting. That might also just be because something is happening in the damned environment which is causing a problem. When I was a medical student, we were told incidence of autism spectrum disorder, one in 1,000. Today, we are talking 1 in 49. God knows what is happening. It can't only be because of extra reporting. It has to be probably something that's in the environment that's causing an issue. And we have so many lovely professionals working with the autism spectrum disorder, but it's an uphill task. When you have physiotherapists, when you have occupational therapists, when you have neurodevelopmental specialists, when you have rehabilitation specialists, speech therapists, when they're doing stuff on the net, it's not as good as if they were in front of you, holding the hand, holding the neck, holding the head, holding the hand properly, saying do this, push, pull. It's not the same. I mean, they're doing a fantastic job, but it's not the same. But we've got to do the best that we can given the circumstances. So sometimes I have kids of special need, parents of special need kids coming up to me and saying, Doc, should I continue? The therapist says, can I continue doing it on the net? And I say, of course you must. Yes, it won't be 100%. Maybe it will be 60, 70%. But imagine if that 60, 70% was not there. Very often we land up getting regression. And we have given our population, if we are looking at even 10% of those kids having problems, and that's an enormous under-evaluation. We're probably close to about 20, 25%. If we have so many kids who are having problems, whether they're learning disability, kids who need special education, or kids who need speech therapy, or kids who need language development, or kids who need OT or PT, it is essential that you continue with it to the utmost possible. It is essential that we do the best that we can so that there is no further regression as much as is possible. It breaks my heart when parents come up to me and say, he was doing so much better and now in the pandemic he's not. He had stopped, shaking from side to side and now again he's started. He had stopped getting so aggressive and now he keeps banging his head on the wall. What am I supposed to do? And of course we give medication. That's also something I'll talk about. Of course we give medication, but you've got to continue with the physiotherapy or whatever else is happening. That should not stop. A little bit on medication. There are huge myths associated with medication, and people are even more frightened if you talk of medication given to children. Attention deficit disorder, a huge number of kids are going to need medication. And it should be stupid to allow the myths that you hold, which would prevent us from giving the medication and prevent your kids from doing much, much better than before. The number of parents I've had who have suggested it in kids who have been in the 7th standard and then finally they come up to the 9th and they say, okay, we'll try now. And then they come back in about 3-4 months saying, oh my God, why did we try it before? It's legion. I'm certainly not suggesting every child should be given medication. I'm certainly not suggesting that every child will be benefited also, but I'm saying there's a huge number of kids who will be. So have the trust in your doctor, follow up with him. If there are side effects, we'll deal with them. And yes, it has to continue as long as the doctor says it must continue. There's nothing as irritating to me as having a kid who was having major problems and then the parents come and say, but he's okay, so I stopped the medication. Would you do that if he had diabetes? His diabetes will go out of sync. Would you do that if he had blood pressure problems? He'd get hypertensive again. Would you ever stop a thyroid medication if you were told you had to take it and you probably were diagnosed? The kid was diagnosed by the time he was 3, 4, 5. He'll have to take it for the rest of his life before breakfast. Nobody ever stops that. But somehow this one stupid tablet, which my colleagues and I give, becomes something that you can't give because it causes this huge problem in everybody. Let's be a little sensible, let's be a little circumspect, and let's do whatever we have to do in order to get our kids to perform to the best of their ability. It is essential, it is imperative, and it is absolutely necessary. Given that, given the fact that in the pandemic we're going to have more aggression, which is we are seeing, we have more kids banging their heads, we have more kids hitting others, including themselves. I've had a huge amount of kids. A few days ago, one of the schools which I'm associated with, a parent called me and said, can I come and see you with my daughter? She's in the 8th or the 9th. She's just gone into the 9th. Daughter wanted to speak to me alone. I had dealt with the brother, and they felt that I was a good chap. Daughter came in and told me, don't tell mommy, but the other day I cut myself. We've got a 13-year-old or 14-year-old kid cutting herself, and you get into this, what we call deliberate self-harm. This is huge in our country. And it belongs to all strata of society, it belongs to all castes and creeds, so let's not get into this. It can't happen in my family, it does happen in your family. It can happen in any family. We've got to do whatever we can to allow our kids to do the best that they can. So what then can parents do? I'm going to take about 3-4 minutes in this and then open to question answers. It is essential for parents to role play what they want. So if you're telling your kid, don't get aggressive, but you start slapping somebody, then you're a horrible image that a kid has to look up to. And eventually, whether we like it or not, our kids do look up to us, especially while they're still kids. By the time they're about 19, 20, of course, you're all idiots and the kids have the answers to the universe. But till that time, they look up to you. So let us do things that they can identify with positively. It is also essential for us to give them proper information. Don't give them too much information about things, including the COVID, and don't give them too little information and say you're too young to understand, because that's being stupid. We need to give kids the awareness of the fact that this is a problem, that you're not going to be allowed to go down to the garden and play with your friends. And we are very sorry, but you can talk to them on the net. You're not going to be allowed to hug and, be close to your best friend. You can't have a sleepover at home unless you're absolutely convinced that the other person is not affected. The frightening thing about the second wave is that more and more kids are getting affected. The frightening thing in terms of the prophecy of the third wave is that even more kids are going to get affected. So let us be as careful as we can, considering the fact that we adults and what we do as adults is going to impinge on the safety of our kids, is going to impinge on how they cope with the future. It is then imperative for us to do whatever we can to ensure that we do nothing stupid or foolhardy or nothing is going to happen to my family kind of situation, so that our kids don't end up having a problem because our kids are getting very badly affected. I'm sure some of you are seeing in your WhatsApp messages about a fungal thing that is happening in a lot of kids, in a lot of people who had COVID. We're seeing that happening in our hospitals now. And it's, at one time we would say bacterial infections are terrible. What the heck? Now we are having viruses which are causing a pandemic, and now we've got fungal infections to boot. Let us be as careful as possible. Let us be as hygienic as possible. Let us be as positive as possible. We got to teach our kids to be involved. We got to teach responsibility. And it's imperative for all parents to make our kids also get responsible in terms of, I'm not going to do everything at home. You are in charge of this. So even a 4 and a 5-year-old kid can be told, put pads on the table. A teenager can certainly be told, clean up your room. And don't jump in when he doesn't, because he wants that to happen. Make the fellow do what he wants to do. We need to make the kids more responsible. And there are a lot of adults, males here, so I'm very pleased to hear that, because like I keep saying, we are no longer talking only of mothering or fathering, we're talking of parenting. But let's stop being superhuman. Mums and dads anyway are superhuman. I mean, we've got eyes at the back of our head, we've got eyes at the top of our head. But let's do whatever we can also to ensure that our kids learn to take responsibility. Let's focus on good behaviors rather than bad. Let's be a great role model for our children. If you're smoking away like a chimney and then you say, I hope you don't get into smoking, that's a little dumb. If you turn alcoholic every single day, especially now in the pandemic, we are seeing a lot of increase in the addictions. People who drink once a week are now drinking every day. People who drink 2 pegs are drinking 6 pegs. People who would smoke 5 cigarettes are now smoking 20. People are taking more and more recourse to drugs because this is the only thing that will make me calm down. That's all nonsense. If we are doing that and if our kids are seeing that happening, then it's not surprising then that they will look at what we are doing and model themselves on our behavior. We've got to get into a situation where we are the best role models possible. And that doesn't mean that you've got to put on things. I'm sure all of us are nice people. I'm sure all of us also are human, so we will do stupid things. But stupid things does not include hitting or pushing or being abusive or getting into addictions or doing all that kind of things. Stupid behavior occasionally means taking more care than what you would, being a little more careful than what you should do, because that is being sensible right now. We need to do the best that we can so that our kids who did not ask to get born into this world, I mean, we brought them out into this world as an act of love and desire. Let's do the best that we can so that at the end of this pandemic, we can all look back and we can laugh together and say, we've survived this. Nobody in the least is suggesting that you should kick your legs up and dance with joy because of what is happening. But we are certainly suggesting that you have to survive it. We have to go on as positively as possible. We have to look at the fact that it will end, because it will end. It will end. It might take a year, but it will end. And then we get back into the land of normal living with a few differences. Over to questions, Prachi, if there are any. Yeah. Okay, so I think a person should not spend more than half an hour a day on the news. I think that's more than enough. Maybe you spend 10 or 15 minutes in the morning and 10 or 15 minutes at night. In the morning, you know then what has happened the previous night. And in the night, you know what has happened during the day. Anyway, everybody's on WhatsApp or Twitter or whatever else. And anyway, we're getting more than the information that is necessary for us to survive. And a lot of the stuff that comes about is absolutely unauthenticated, nonsensical stuff. Now, let me tell you this again. And I'm glad you brought this up because it skipped my mind. A lot of the nonsense that we are reading related to COVID is nonsense. So please follow an authenticated website if you're doing things related to nonsense. The latest thing, which I love, of course, is drink more whiskey and you'll make the virus die. I wish that were true, but it's not. So do sensible things if you want to get rid of the virus. Do sensible things in terms of the vaccination. There are so many people who have so many ideas about vaccination, which are all nonsense. Let me state over here, everybody should get vaccinated, whether you are pregnant or not, whether you have a special child or not. For the pregnancy, talk to your gynecologist, but otherwise, everybody else, whether you're old or young, should get the vaccines taken, and that is one thing that is known to them. We do the best that we can. We take the help of everybody that is available. I mean, let's not become Superman or Superwoman. And also, let's not get into this thing of I don't want to impose on somebody. I have a lot of people who say I don't want to ask anybody else. I have somebody who's looking down at me on the net who keeps apologizing for asking for help. And I keep saying, you don't have to keep apologizing. The bottom line is, if there is a problem and you need help, If somebody else needs help, they're going to ask you. And most of us are nice people and will give the help that they want, that they need. Ditto. If you're asking for help for somebody, if that person has a problem and cannot provide the help, he will say no or she will say no. Don't take it for granted that the person is going to say. So if you need to help about, if you need to help people, sorry, if you need help from people, ask for it. Point number two, sometimes you need a little more professional help. You know, I was talking of this autism spectrum disorder thing, and in this autism spectrum disorder, I was so heartbroken about 9 months ago. We had this doctor couple who had an autistic spectrum disorder child, and he was a young adult. He would get very aggressive, but they had found that at about 6 o'clock in the evening, if they could take him for a drive, and it had to be in a particular way, a particular route, take X amount of time, come back home, and he was calm. And if he didn't have that privilege, he would get into a tantrum, shout, scream, hit others, etc., etc. I mean, he was on medication, but eventually you just can't keep upping the dose and upping the dose and upping the dose because it does have side effects on occasion. Given the fact that there was a very strict lockdown at that time, even though one of the parents was a doctor, she asked me what could be done. And I just suggested that you are allowed as a health worker to go. He didn't come in the category of a health worker. I sent them a letter saying that he was under my care and that I felt it was absolutely essential, blah, blah, blah. I said, why don't you try with the cops? They went to the cop station and the cop was brilliant. And I must say this, we hear about the bad things associated with cops. I have had such fantastic episodes. And believe me, I've had a lot of episodes with cops. We've had a lot of episodes of brilliant cops where this guy just, the superintendent or whoever it is, just got into this thing of, yes, I need to give you a letter. He gave a certificate and that kid was given the privilege of being a special person with special needs, and the parent could take the child and write the child at the time that was necessary. That reinforces my faith in humanity. I think we have to take into account the fact that when we have special children, or when we know people who have special children, let's connect as much as we can to them. Let's connect as much as we can in a way that makes them also feel that they are not alone and that it is perfectly okay with people who need your help. Let's not make them feel worse than what they were. We have to remember that when a person gets married, he doesn't get married thinking he's going to have a divorce. When a person has a special child, he never has a child thinking that it's going to be a special one. Your love for that kid will never reduce, but it would be nice if people around you were supportive rather than derogatory. So at least on our side, let's do the best that we can to make everybody feel inclusive, included, loved, and it doesn't matter whether you can't talk properly or you can't walk properly or you have funny mannerisms, you're still a loved person. I've got some questions, Prachi, if you don't mind, I'll answer it. Yeah. Somebody has said, I'm not listening to the speaker, it's distracting. I don't know what that means. Okay. Somebody has said, can you please talk about strategies you shared with your parents to overcome technical addiction? I see that even happening in children below 2. That is something that we are seeing. We are seeing this addiction thing happening at younger and younger age groups. So my thing is, let's be proactive and prevent it from happening. There are too many parents who just plonk the child in front of a television or give a mobile to a child and sit while they're eating, for example, which is probably the worst thing possible. Try not to watch television while you're eating, especially for the child. I don't think that's a good idea. It causes a kid to then associate television with something like food, and that's not a good idea. It's a good idea to try to do other things in order to distract the child, and especially for a 2-year-old. I think the Indian Pediatric Society had actually said try to avoid any kind of cell use for that age. But the bottom line is, let's try to do things which are more interactive, however difficult it might be. So do more talking and laughing and playing games and the usual singing and dancing and things like that. And that will be much more effective for a child, especially in that age group, if you have to do things in order to get him to pass his time, rather than just giving him something which later on could have bad effects. So it's a good idea for us to avoid it. Somebody has given me another very nice question. How sensible is it that a 20-year-old and a 24-year-old siblings live alone, both with mental health histories? So I really don't know. It's very difficult. Okay. I'm not going to be talking about specifics over here. In general, even if they have mental health histories, provided they have a supportive environment, I think it compensates for whatever happens. We do the best that we can. We be as supportive as possible. We cannot live their lives for them. They have to do things in terms of, also becoming independent and so on and so forth. So give them the opportunity to do what they have to do for themselves. At the same time, take whatever precautions are possible. But you cannot live your life. You cannot live their lives for them. The same person has said, can one take the vaccine and high BP? Yes, one can take the vaccine and high. Enjoy the content. Thank you. Oh, somebody has said people need to close their videos if they're not listening to the speaker. It's distracting. Yes, I know. Even I was getting a little distracted. Thank you. That's the questions that I have in front of me. Thank you for the great talk. Thank you, Stu. Okay, any more? Prachi, did you get anything? Okay. Okay. Somebody saying, again, somebody is asking about gadget addiction in kids. So, one of the things that I think we need to do as parents and as adults is we need to show people that we are parents and adults. Sometimes what happens is we get up into this, if I say no, he won't like me. If I say no, I'll be a bad person. That's all nonsense. We need to get into a situation where we allow for laying down rules and limits. And we do know, especially in teenagers, that laying down limits, even if the kids get very angry and say, uh, even if they get very angry and say, I wish I was born in the other family, they are allowed to do what they want, you're so strict. Somehow laying down rules and limitations makes, especially a teenager, feel that you care enough for him to say no. And I think that's a very, very important feeling for that person to get. So it would be a good idea to, if at times you feel you want to say no, and that includes gadgets. Yes, I know. People say we are working parents. We will rely on technology. I know that. We do rely on electronics to babysit. What's the maximum time we can give gadgets to kids? I have a 7-year-old. Okay. Technically, I'm not absolutely certain. I know that there are guidelines laid down. I think a 7-year-old will probably say 1 or 2 hours a day maximum, and less if it's possible. Up to the age of 2 or 3, we say nothing. So that's the way it goes. Let's be practical. Let's be realistic. If you need to do it, you need to do it. If you don't need to do it, you don't need to do it. And quite correctly, like somebody said, it depends on the family. Now, I've had people in the past saying that there's an old grandmother at home and the only thing that she can do is watch television. So how can we switch off the TV? And you can't. So let's be practical. Let's be sensible. Some more questions coming up suddenly. If a child is aggressive, how to deal with it? One of the most important things to do is to find out the cause of the aggression. There could be a whole bunch of them. Sometimes, incidentally, a child is aggressive because the child is depressed. So, we talk about depression, we say, oh, the child will be quiet and withdrawn and so on. But there's another thing where he also gets very aggressive and acts out and so on and so forth. So it's absolutely essential for a proper evaluation to be done by a psychiatrist preferably or a psychologist, and then see what needs to be done. There may be nothing at all, but there may be something. If there is something, we need to deal with it. If there's nothing at all, great. How do you balance online screen time at school? Well, you can't. the school will lay down its property. The school will lay down its things. You can't do anything about the school. Unfortunately, schools are in a very bad position. They cannot stop teaching. And if the only way to teach is to go through the screen, then they go through the screen. Something more coming up. I'm speaking to a student of domestic violence in Bangalore. I know she needs professional help. How do I go about it? I don't know. Are you in Bombay? If you are in Bombay, then it becomes a little more difficult. But we have, depending on the capacity of the person, I mean, you can either suggest either to the person to go to a private hospital or a public hospital, that is to a private practitioner who is a psychiatrist, or a psychiatrist in a general or a municipal hospital, where certainly help will be given. If that is not possible, and if the domestic violence is very bad, then there have been times when you've actually made complaints, when we have made complaints to the cops. And at least in this, especially if it comes from a professional, the cops are fairly proactive. So I would think that that would be a good thing. But I'm so glad that you're doing what you're doing, because domestic violence is a horrible thing. And like I said some time ago, we are seeing more and more of it, which is a sad indictment of the society that we are living in. I think that takes care of most of the question. In Bangalore. Okay. So, madam, I mean, if you need it, you're welcome to get in touch with me, and I will give you the names of some excellent psychiatrists in Bangalore who do a lot of work with abuse, whether it's adults or children. So, maybe you can get there in. Yeah? Prachi, are you still there? She's run away. Okay. No, you're not. Okay, doesn't matter. I think we should. I think it's 10 past 12. How do you handle verbal abuse? Okay. You kind of tell the person that you're not very happy with the verbal abuse, that you're not going to take it anymore. If it becomes too much, then you take a call as to what you want to do with the person. Once again, it's difficult to generalize. It's difficult to be generalized in a situation like this. Verbal abuse is only one of the symptoms that could be part of a huge bunch of other things that is happening. So you probably would need to be a little more detailed about what is. Prachi, thank you. Be safe. Bye. Take care.
Thank you, doctor.
Pleasure.